Hello, YouTube! Hey. Although I had everything all plugged in correctly and fiddled around with all the volume controls, this amplifier still doesn't make any noise. So let's try to figure out what's wrong with it and see if we can fix it. Now the lights on the front panel do turn on, so we know that the fuse is not at fault, because that would be the first thing we try to fix. And if you recall from my previous video on how speakers work, I'll leave a link right up here. Speakers have a coil inside, and as long as you pass electricity through it, the coil will move forwards and backwards. So that's the first thing we're going to test. Using a regular AA cell and a piece of wire, you want to connect one end of the cell to one lead of the speaker, and the far end you just want to briefly tap it on the other terminal, listening for a scratching sound. So that scratching cell tells us that the speaker still works. So let's take apart the rest of the amplifier and see what's going on. There are 4 screws to unscrew to remove the amplifier assembly. Now before you open it, obviously unplug it first. You don't want to get electrocuted. Before you remove the amplifier assembly, make sure that you unplug the speaker from the assembly itself. Bend down, it will slide right out. With a clean set of fingers, grab onto and carefully pull out every single knob. Internally, you can unplug the wire that leads towards the speakers, and there's 1 screw and 1 nut to remove. From the front panel, make sure you unscrew every single nut. As for the bolts at the edges, it is not necessary to remove. And lastly, before you disassemble the entire setup, make sure that you unscrew the nut that holds onto the guitar plug-in as well as the phone's plug-in. So here's the inside of the Spyder 330 watt amplifier. On the left-hand side, you have your guitar input. That seems to be where the issue is, but there's also a CD in on the right-hand side. So what I'll do is I'll just reroute the input from the CD in to the guitar in, and I hope that I'm able to restore this guitar. We're going to lose it on all the features on the left-hand side, but that's okay. I think most people who own an amplifier, they probably have a foot effects pedal anyways. So looking at the circuit itself, we start off with the ground input at the top, and in the center over here, that's the ring input, but for most people they never use the ring, so please ignore that input over there. Instead, what's really important is this bottom right-hand pin. That is your tip input of the guitar itself. And I'm going to reroute this line and shunt it all the way across the circuit to the input left on the CD in on the far right-hand side. And then with that spare right, what I'm going to do is that I've already done this earlier, but I'm going to go and attach it to the back of the amplifier itself. So this XLR input, I pre-drilled it earlier, and I've mounted it just using some hot glue to hold it in place before I finally mount it with screws. Now there's one interesting thing about the circuit itself. If I have the guitar plug plugged in, the connections on opposite ends are disconnected. However, the moment I unplug it, the opposite ends become connected, and they all get connected to ground. So unfortunately, on the far right-hand side of the circuit, what I'll have to do is I'll have to desolder and remove my CD input so that when there's nothing placed in, it won't automatically short to ground, ruining my input. I finally removed the phone jack. Next, I'm going to route a wire from the left input here to the left input on this side over here, and I'm also going to remove L9 right over here. L is for an inductor, and inductor pretty much behaves as a short circuit at low frequencies, and at a higher frequency it kind of opens up the circuit. So I want to remove it to permanently leave it as an open circuit. That way it'll definitely communicate the signal all the way across without any issues. Now, even though I did remove the inductor off the circuit, I decided to reconnect it down below just so that it's around and available in case if I ever want to reattach it in the future. Alright, so here's my first trace from the left input from the guitar to the left input of the CD that used to be there. Next, I'm going to connect the right channel input to the XLR input. Well, I hope that we all had an awesome time tonight, and a special shout out to one of my favorite viewers. Yeah, that's right, you over there, Mr. Bear. Thank you for being an awesome Patreon. And I want to thank you too for joining us today, and I hope that you learned something new. That if you have an old amplifier and doesn't seem to be working anymore, you might want to check another input, because if that input still works, you can reroute the signal and resalvage the old beast. And for more adventures like this, make sure you like, click, subscribe, and mash that bell button for more awesome other adventures. How about I play us out with a song?